The beginning of September was nothing short of breathtaking. The late summer sun drenched the grounds of the exclusive country club in the heart of the Blue Ridge Mountains, where luxury guest cabins and sprawling stone patio grilling areas were nestled among towering pines. Music hummed through the crisp air. Well-dressed event staff bustled about, arranging gourmet spreads and homemade delicacies brought by the employees. Kamisi had arrived with her husband for the 15th anniversary gala of the high-end logistics firm where Jelani worked. She stood at the open trunk of their luxury SUV, struggling to lift a heavy, cloth-covered basket filled with food. Before she could get a good grip, Jelani shoved her shoulder aside and yanked the basket out himself. "Lower your elbows, Kamisi. You look like a mess," Jelani hissed, his voice a low, jagged edge. "If anyone approaches us, keep your mouth shut. Just nod and smile. If they ask about the food, call me over. I'll handle the talk. And for heaven's sake, don't let any of that southern country talk slip out. I won't have people laughing at me." He sounded so different from the man she knew at home. His accent sharpened into something artificial and cold. "I can't believe the CEO thought this was a good idea," he continued, "dragging spouses to a corporate retreat and asking for heritage dishes. It's archaic." Kamisi stayed silent, though she felt a sharp sting of injustice in her chest. She watched as her husband glanced nervously at his coworkers, who were dressed in vibrant linen shirts and flowing silk sundresses. He tried to shield the basket with his body, as if it contained something shameful rather than the result of her hours of careful labor in the kitchen. Caught in his web of anxiety, Kamisi began to feel like the polished, wealthy crowd was eyeing her simple hairstyle and modest dress with hidden mockery. Just then, the crowd near the buffet tables parted, and a striking woman in a tailored sand-colored silk suit walked toward them with effortless confidence. She was the embodiment of quiet power and impeccable taste. She carried nothing but a slim leather tablet, and every step she took was met with respectful smiles from the staff. "Miss Galani, where should we set the hors d'oeuvres?" a junior staffer asked, intercepting her. "What do you have?" Zalani glanced briefly at a beautiful, deep ceramic dish. "Lobster and crab cakes with a spicy remoulade," the staffer replied, holding the tray out. "Put them on the center table in the shade," Zalani commanded, without breaking her stride, "and make sure the garnish doesn't wilt. We aren't running a roadside diner. This is an anniversary showcase." She stopped in front of Jelani and fixed her gaze on Kamisi. Kamisi felt an immediate wave of discomfort. "So, this is her," the woman murmured, her voice like cold honey. She let her eyes travel slowly over Kamisi in a long, predatory assessment. There was no outward hostility, only a freezing, arrogant sense of superiority. "Yes, she's exactly what I imagined." Kamisi felt a surge of protest rise within her at such blatant rudeness. She wanted to speak up, but her naturally quiet nature took over, urging her to stay calm for the sake of her husband's career. "Good afternoon," Kamisi said, maintaining her dignity. "Charming," Zalani said, narrowing her eyes as she adjusted a perfect strand of hair. "It's so rare to see a homebody these days. A woman who still salts her own greens and bakes hand pies as if she's stuck in the last century." Kamisi felt a lump form in her throat. It was unsettling that this total stranger knew such personal details about her life. But then Jelani spoke, and Kamisi wished he hadn't. "Ms. Jelani, where should we put this?" Jelani asked, his voice eager to please. She insisted on making these savory wild ramp and mushroom tarts. I told her the smell would carry for a mile. I told her if she couldn't make something sophisticated, she should have just bought something French and high-end. But she's stubborn. He let out a short, nasty laugh. Kamisi froze. She hadn't expected such a betrayal from her own husband. Zalani wrinkled her nose at the basket, as if it were filled with something slimy. She laughed, a dry, hollow sound, and gave Jelani a meaningful look. "Goodness, Jelani, how quaint! Truly a faux pas," she said, flicking a manicured finger toward the far edge of the grounds. Put that on the back tables, dear, so the scent doesn't clash with the actual catering. Maybe some of the security detail will be brave enough to try your exotic fare." Then she crooked a finger at Jelani. "And you, Mr. Vance, come with me. I need to speak with you privately before the chairman arrives." Kamisi was left standing alone with the heavy basket at her feet. She watched the arrogant woman lead her husband away and felt utterly invisible at a party where her hard work had been turned into a punchline. Once alone, Kamisi took a deep breath to steady the trembling in her hands. The noise of the party, the clinking of crystal, the bursts of laughter, the rhythmic bass of the music, felt muffled, as if she were underwater. She dragged the basket to the long row of tables where servers in crisp uniforms were working. On the very last empty table, she unpacked nearly a dozen savory tarts. She began to slice them into portions with a knife she'd brought from home. Her movements were calm. She didn't rush. She was the kind of woman who knew how to wait out a storm, believing that most of life's troubles were just temporary weather. As she touched the golden, flaky crust of each tart, memories of her past surfaced. She remembered arriving in the city as a 19-year-old girl from the rural Lowcountry to attend university. That was where she had met Jelani, bright, ambitious, and strangely intense. Kamisi, used to the slow, measured pace of her coastal home, had been swept away by his energy. One day he'd bring her a massive bouquet of roses he'd somehow convinced his frat brothers to chip in for. The next, he'd talk his way into exclusive event tickets. They married during their senior year. After the wedding, she became his foundation. As Jelani climbed the corporate ladder, she quietly accepted his growing coldness and frequent business trips, believing it was just the price of their shared success. She wasn't high maintenance. If he was silent, she assumed he was tired. If he ignored her, she assumed he was busy. But even her endurance had a limit. Having finished her work, Kamisi looked around. Jelani was nowhere to be seen. She began to walk deeper into the resort grounds, her eyes scanning the groups of chatting guests. Soon, she spotted them. Jelani and Zolani were standing by a vintage champagne cart. Zolani held a chilled glass and was laughing loudly. Kamisi stopped, watching from behind the shadow of a large oak tree. Jelani was whispering something intensely to his colleague, leaning in with a slick, triumphant smile. The woman laughed at his jokes the same way Kamisi used to years ago when she was just a young student. At one point, Zolani reached up to adjust her hair, and Kamisi felt her heart drop into her stomach. On the woman's wrist, a gold bracelet in the shape of a grapevine, studded with tiny diamonds, flashed in the sun. It was the exact same bracelet Kamisi had found in her husband's coat pocket a week ago. She had held her breath then, thinking it was an anniversary gift for her. Now, seeing it on Zolani's arm, the gold didn't just represent an affair, it represented the total devaluation of her entire life. Everything she had protected and nurtured was being treated as worthless. Kamisi's face remained a mask, but the muscles in her jaw tightened. She would not tolerate betrayal. She watched as Zolani gave Jelani a short nod, and they walked together toward one of the secluded guest cabins at the edge of the woods. Kamisi followed them, not even bothering to hide. She knew that behind that door lay a truth she was finally ready to face. The cabin was built of dark timber and sat in the deep shade of the pines. The door was slightly ajar, perhaps left that way in haste or out of a reckless sense of being untouchable. Kamisi stood on the porch, leaning her back against the rough wood wall. She didn't feel fear, only a strange, cold curiosity. She pulled out her smartphone, a device she usually only used for occasional calls and for posting photos of her culinary creations to her small social media following. With a practiced motion, she hit the record button and waited, her ears tuned to the voices inside. "You told me she was plain, but I didn't expect a complete auntie type," Zolani's voice rang out, now stripped of its professional sweetness. "How do you still put up with her? There's zero intellect there. I feel sorry for you, Jelani. Isn't it time to cut the cord and go public with us?" "Stop it. It's not time yet." Jelani's voice was muffled and sounded irritated. "She doesn't see anything past her pots and pans. We can't go public yet, which is why I had to bring her." The old man would notice. He's obsessed with family values, and I'm in his top tier right now. We just need a little more silence to finish what we started. Kamisi closed her eyes, feeling herself turn to stone inside. The phone continued to capture every word. "Did you see the report for our own firm?" Zolani's voice was full of predatory triumph. "Those 5 clients we poached from the old fool last month have already brought in our first major profit. This is just the beginning, Jelani. If we sign the logistics contract tomorrow, the old man is left with nothing, and we walk away with millions." "As long as the rest transition just as quietly," Jelani replied, and Kamisi heard that familiar tone of greed in his voice. "I've already laid the groundwork. While Solomon Vance is busy celebrating 15 years of his company, we're dismantling it brick by brick. Our profits are multiplying. I'm on fire just thinking about it." "I am too, darling, but it's too dangerous here," Zolani whispered. "Not here. Later, for us." She let out a soft laugh, and Kamisi heard the distinct clink of glasses. "Just hurry up and get rid of that drab wife of yours. Send her home in an Uber. Tell her some lie. I don't want her lurking around here with her stinking greens. Consider it done. I'll make her leave so fast she'll forget her own name," Jelani promised. Kamisi heard the clinking of champagne glasses again. "To clear horizons and let the old life rot where it stands." Kamisi slowly pressed the save button and tucked the phone into her pocket. Her breathing was steady, and her gaze was terrifyingly clear. She felt no urge to burst inside. In her family, the women taught, "If you want to fell a rotten tree, don't swing blindly. Wait until it starts to lean." She turned around and walked calmly back toward the barbecue area. In her mind, a plan was forming, precise and merciless. The party was in full swing. Kamisi stayed on the fringes, noticing as a massive, dark limousine pulled up to the entrance. She didn't know who it was, but she felt an invisible wave ripple through the crowd. The laughter grew quieter. People stood taller, and those sitting rose to their feet. A calm, distinguished man in an understated but expensive blazer stepped out. As the employees parted with deep respect, Kamisi realized the man she worked for, the man Jelani was robbing, had arrived. Zolani and Jelani rejoined the crowd separately, but they stood near each other as if by accident. Jelani looked wound up. There was a feverish, arrogant light in his eyes that always appeared after a couple of drinks, and the scent of a big win. Kamisi didn't wait. She stepped toward Zolani, and before the woman could gracefully pivot away, Kamisi gripped her wrist firmly. Zolani flinched. Her face contorted with disgust, as if a toad had touched her skin. Nodding at the gold grapevine bracelet, Kamisi asked loudly enough for those nearby to hear, "Jelani, how do you explain this?" Jelani, clearly not expecting his quiet wife to attack so directly in front of witnesses, was momentarily speechless. He stammered, but Zolani tried to save the situation. She let out a sharp, mocking laugh, addressing the nearby colleagues. "Oh, look at this! How precious! Our guest has decided to throw a jealous tantrum over a corporate gift. Mr. Vance, it seems your wife has confused an executive retreat with a backyard cookout. And look at what she's done to the table. It's practically a folk art exhibit." She pointed toward the far table covered in Kamisi's savory tarts. Everyone turned to look at the rustic, handmade pieces. Jelani immediately took his mistress's lead. "You're an embarrassment," he hissed, grabbing Kamisi by the shoulder. "Take your food and get to the car right now. I won't have you turning this anniversary into a circus." He tried to force her toward the exit, but Kamisi stood her ground. In a fit of anger, Jelani yanked her arm, but she jerked away with such force that he lost his balance on the damp grass. Flailing his arms, he fell backward, directly onto the main buffet table. There was a sickening crash of breaking glass and splintering wood. The table tilted, and pyramids of expensive crystal and gourmet appetizers slid to the ground in a devastating avalanche. A dead, terrifying silence fell over the lawn. Zolani stood with her mouth open, staring at the ruins of her organized perfection. Kamisi felt the heat rush to her face. She felt a deep sense of shame that a family spat had ruined the evening for everyone. Without wasting time on excuses, she turned to the two women standing closest to her. In their eyes, she saw not mockery, but confusion and a desire to help. "Ladies, please, don't just stand there. Help me," Kamisi commanded in a low but authoritative voice. "Let's get the fresh linens. I saw clean ones in the corner. Help me reset the service." Then she looked at the men standing nearby. "Gentlemen, move that back table up here. Now." Her calm, take-charge tone acted like a splash of cold water. While Zelani stood in shock, not knowing where to start, Kamisi reorganized the entire space in mere minutes. Her golden brown tarts, which had been hidden away, were now placed in the center of the fresh spread. At that moment, the distinguished man from the limousine approached the table. It was clear from his expression that he had seen everything, Jelani's fall, and how quickly this woman in her simple dress had taken control of the chaos. With a warm smile, he diffused the tension. He reached out, took a piece of a tart, studied it for a second, and then took a large bite. Jelani, trying to stand up and brushing off his wet sleeve, began to stammer. "Mr. Vance, sir, please don't eat that. It's just something my wife made. She's from the country. She isn't used to refined company." "You know, Jelani," the chairman interrupted, his voice laced with irony, "if everyone in my logistics department moved as precisely and effectively as your wife just did to save this table, we'd own the global market by now." He turned to Kamisi and squinted playfully. "Usually at these functions, the food looks like museum exhibits. Beautiful, but soulless. But your tart? It's dangerous. If I have another bite, I might forget I'm a serious CEO and ask for seconds. Tell me, what is the secret ingredient in this filling? There's a bold note I can't quite place." Kamisi, feeling the tension finally break, answered clearly and confidently. "Wild ramps and morels, sir." Solomon Vance looked at her with genuine surprise and finished the bite with visible pleasure. "Well, I'll be. I thought I couldn't be surprised anymore. Ramps can be bitter if you don't know what you're doing. How did you make them so savory?" "The secret is in the soaking, sir. I change the water every hour on the hour. Then I slow roast them in the oven on the lowest possible heat." Kamisi smiled. "It's an old recipe from my great-grandmother. I just adapted it for a modern kitchen." "All that work for a tart?" The chairman shook his head. "Everything is so rushed these days. You are a true artisan." Solomon Vance looked at his quieted staff and then nodded at the smartphone in Kamisi's hand. "I bet you have the recipe tucked away in there. Share it with us." "Actually, I was recording some of the process yesterday so I wouldn't forget the timing," Kamisi said, opening her gallery. "Look, this is the color the crust should be." She started scrolling through her photos, and then, seemingly by accident, the video from the cabin began to play. In the silence of the mountain air, Zelani's predatory voice rang out. "The old fool won't even notice he's been robbed." The recording, filmed through the crack in the door, showed Jelani and Zelani sitting close together, discussing in vivid detail how they were stealing Solomon Vance's clients for their new firm. The lawn became so quiet you could hear a bird cry in the distant woods. The chairman slowly took the phone from Kamisi's hand. His face turned to stone. He listened to the recording until the very end, until the triumphant clink of their champagne glasses. "So, the old fool, is it?" he repeated quietly, handing the phone back to Kamisi. "My analysts have been wondering where our clients were disappearing to for 3 months. Now I see exactly where." "Mr. Vance, sir, that was a joke. Corporate humor," Jelani stammered, backing away. But then Zelani exploded. She shoved Jelani with such force he nearly fell again. "You idiot!" she shrieked, losing every ounce of her polished composure. "I told you to send that miserable woman home. You loser, you ruined everything. Everything we worked for is gone because you're too stupid to handle your own wife. I never want to see you again." Zelani pushed through her colleagues and ran toward the parking lot, shouting curses. Jelani froze, looking from his enraged boss to his wife. "Are you happy now, you snake?" he hissed at Kamisi with pure hatred. "You destroyed everything. Do you realize you're nothing now? Who's going to want you and your pots and pans?" Kamisi looked at him long and hard, as if seeing a complete stranger for the first time in years. She didn't scream. Her voice was remarkably steady and deep. "You know, Jelani," she said with a soft, almost pitying smile, "you spent so long trying to convince me of my own worthlessness that you didn't notice you were the one who became empty. I didn't destroy your life. I just turned on the light where you were hiding your filth. Live with that now, but live with it without me." Jelani lunged forward. In a fit of desperate rage, he reached for the table to tear the tablecloth away and ruin her food. But two large security guards, acting on a silent nod from the chairman, grabbed him by the elbows. They pried his fingers from the cloth and firmly but inevitably escorted him toward the exit. He looked pathetic, disheveled, angry, and utterly alone in a crowd of people looking at him with disgust. Solomon Vance walked over to Kamisi. "May I call you Kamisi?" he asked softly. "Yes, sir," she replied. "Kamisi, a position just opened up for a director of hospitality and corporate culture. It's a high-priority vacancy, you might say. I desperately need someone with your composure and your intuition. And those tarts? I want them on our executive menus. Think about it. Today, you proved you know how to bring order where others only bring chaos." Kamisi looked at the happy faces of the people enjoying her food, at the pines, and at the vast blue sky. She realized her life wasn't over. It was just beginning. Ahead of her was a new career, new people, and perhaps eventually a new kind of love. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and for the first time in years, she smiled with her whole soul. 6 months passed. The company avoided a loud public trial, but Solomon Vance hit his former senior manager with such a heavy lawsuit for embezzlement that Jelani had to sell everything he owned to cover the debts. Jelani, as expected, didn't stick around for the fallout. She vanished from the city within a week, blocking Jelani on every platform. Jelani was never able to find a decent job again. His reputation in the industry was completely destroyed. Kamisi was officially named the Director of Corporate Service and Hospitality. Under her leadership, office lunches became legendary culinary events, and the company's partners began scheduling meetings at the headquarters just to taste those famous tarts. Kamisi blossomed, updated her wardrobe, and never felt like a shadow again. She filed for divorce and started her life from a clean slate, where her talent was finally the headline. Solomon Vance found more than just a valuable employee in Kamisi. He found a kindred spirit. He began staying late after work just to talk with her over a cup of tea. On weekends, his car was often seen in the quiet, tree-lined neighborhood where Kamisi had rented a beautiful home. Solomon grew to love the peace of those streets, so much like the small-town roots he'd come from. But more than that, he loved the warmth and honesty that now filled Kamisi's life. As spring approached, they decided to welcome the new season, not as boss and employee, but as two people who had found each other against all odds. Did you like the story, and which city are you listening from? Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.